All right, here I am in SQL Server Data Tools with the script project. So this is a very simple project, has a control flow, single script task that doesn't really do all that much. And I'm going to continue to use this project. All right, so the first thing I need to do is define some variables. To do that, I'll come up here to SSIS and select Variables. And that opens up this Variables window. And I'll widen it a little bit so you can see all the columns there. And this is how I can add variables to the package. So I'll click on the Add Variable icon there, and it creates a new line. And I'm going to call this isWeekday, because I'm going to use this variable to indicate whether or not the current date is a weekday when this package is executing. All right, the scope is the script package. And then the data type is going to be Boolean. And notice that I have a pretty good range of data types that I can use, numbers and strings and unsigned integers and so forth, but in this case it's just a Boolean. And I'll leave the default value to false, but I could change that to true if I wanted to. All right, I could also use an expression in order to define the value, but I'm not going to do that in this particular example. And okay, so that's all I need. I just need to define that variable. Now this window is a little peculiar. I don't need to save it explicitly. So I can move it out of the way or close the window or whatever, and it'll save that definition. So now I have that isWeekday variable that's defined within the package. Okay, now I'm going to go back into script task here and open up the script task editor. And I need to specify the two variables that I'm going to use within this script task. The first one is a read-only variable. And specifically what I want to do is I want to have access to the start time. So I'll click on that button there, and I can scroll down here and look for start time and select that one right there. Okay, and then I'll come down here to read-write variables, and here I want to specify the isWeekday. Now I could type in user : isWeekday if I wanted to, but I'll just select it from the list. Because the nice thing here is that because these are read-write variables, the system variables don't appear, so it's a much shorter list. But again, I could just directly type in user : isWeekday as well. Okay, so because I'm declaring these variables here, I'm going to have access to them within the variables collection within the Vista code window. Okay? Now, strictly speaking, it's not necessary to use the namespaces here, system and user, because in this case each variable name is unique. But it's a good practice to get into to always use the namespace, both to avoid problems with namespace clashes when you update the package later and to make your package more maintainable. It'd be easy to forget that start date is the system variable and go looking for it in the wrong place. As you get used to integration services, you'll learn, as you write more and more code using the script tasking component, you'll learn all the different system variable names, so you're not likely to make that mistake, but it's a nice way to document what's actually going on. Okay, so I've declared those, and now Vista is able to create those wrappers. Another important thing to point out here is that this was an existing script task. So I had previously added some trivial script to the task, and that does not prevent me from coming back out here and adding additional variables. So next time I start Vista, it'll wire up those variables and add them to whatever list there is at that point. Okay, so I can do this iteratively. If I forget any variables, it's not the end of the world. Okay, so now I'm going to go into the Vista development environment. And that often takes a few moments to start up. Okay, there we go. I'm going to move these out of the way. Okay, so I'm going to now change this main method. I'm going to have it do something useful. Okay, so I'll hit enter. And the first thing I want to do is I want to get access to the start time of the package. So I'm going to use a datetime object. Notice that I'm in Visual Studio for all intents and purposes. I get IntelliSense. I get this kind of help with my typing. So I want a datetime object. I'm going to call it start date. And then I'm going to use the convert object and the toDateTime in order to read the start time value from the DTS variables collection. And so I have to convert that to the type that I want, because they're going to be returned as generic objects. In order to do this, I need to use the DTS object, and I'll use the variables collection. Notice there's the variable dispenser, but I'm going to use the variables collection. And then I need to access the system, using the namespace there, start time, and I need to access the value of that. Okay, so again, what's happened here is I'm accessing the start time variable. Again, I can do this because I added it to the editor window as a read-only variable. I'm using the variables collection of the DTS object, and then I need to take that value and convert it to my date time type. And there's various ways to do conversions, but here I selected the convert object. All right, now I need to take that value, use that value, and update the isWeekday variable. So I'm going to write some fairly simple code. So I'm going to say if start date dot day of week is equal to day of week dot Saturday, or start date dot day of week is equal to day of week dot Sunday. Okay, so here I'm just using features of the .NET framework. So day of week is a property of a date time object, and I'm comparing it to an enumeration, Saturday or Sunday. Okay, so if it is Saturday or Sunday, I need to set the value of the isWeekday, and in this case I'm not going to use the namespace because there isn't any ambiguity here, but often you'll want to include the namespace. So I'm going to access that variable value and set that equal to false in this case because it's not a weekday. Otherwise, I'll do the same sort of thing. And set it equal to true. Okay, and all the red squigglies go away. Always a good sign. All right, so again, all I'm doing is I'm just changing the value of that variable. I can change it because I added it to the read-write variables within the script task editor. And then the last thing I need to do is change this to success. And so it's always going to end in success. All right, so that's all the changes I need to do. Out of force of habit, I'll save everything. And then I will close that window and click on OK to close the dialog box. There we go. Okay. So now I'm going to add another script task to the control flow. And I'm going to rename this to weekday. And I'll add one more. And I'll name this weekend. All right, I'm going to add some precedence constraints. Right there, weekday. And then do the same thing to weekend. Make it look a little bit better here. Okay, and so there's the control flow. Now, as you might imagine, I have these two different control flows because I want the control flow to go down different paths based on whether today is a weekday or if today is a weekend. Okay, so now in order to make that work, I need to change these precedent constraints. So I'll select that one, right-click on it, and select Edit. And that opens up this precedence constraint editor. In this case, I want the evaluation operation to be based on an expression. Okay? And I do have several other options that I can use there. And then, in the expression, I want to test the value of isWeekday. So I need to use @ in order to identify it as a variable. isWeekday equal to true. Okay? Because again, this is the one for the weekday task. Okay, I can click on the test button. That's a pretty simple expression, so I'm fairly confident it's going to work. And then I can click on OK. And now you can see that there's the FX symbol there. And this path is going to go down when isWeekday is equal to true. So then I need to do the same sort of thing over here. Come here to Edit, change it to Expression, and put in @isWeekday equal to false. Okay, which means that it's a weekend. Okay, so now I've determined how each of these data flows is going to be determined. The other thing I want to do is I want to select both of these. So I'm going to hold down the Control key and select both of them, and press F4 to open up the Properties window. Because I want to change the Show Annotation. And I want to change this to Constraint Options. Okay. So as you can see, this causes the designer to display the expression next to the precedence constraint on the control flow designer. And I kind of need to move these out a little bit so you can see the different expressions. Okay, so in this case, I selected the green precedence, so it's for completion, and isWeekday is equal to true. And this is completion, so this task has to complete, and isWeekday equals false. This is a nice way to make the control flow more self-documented. You can see, you don't have to go into those dialog boxes to see what's going on. Okay, so let's see what today is. So I'll come down here, there's script, right-click it, and select execute. And as you can see here, if I move this down a bit, you can see that the path that was taken is a weekday, and today is in fact a weekday, happens to be a Tuesday, and so the code executed correctly. And this path didn't go down because the script code here set the value of isWeekday, and then the precedence constraints were able to use that value in order to determine the flow of execution. And then of course, if I were to run this again on this coming Saturday, then this path would be followed. Okay, so that shows a simple example of using a script task with variables in order to communicate between different tasks. One of many different ways of doing that sort of a thing. Okay, now that you know how to add script to the control flow by using the script task, what do you actually do with it? Well, the short answer is anything you want. But there are a few specific examples of real-world ways to enhance your control flow using custom code within a script task. First is custom logging. Each built-in task logs information based on the logic that Microsoft defined for the task. But what if you want to log your own information to the package's logging providers? And there's several different providers that you can use. In that case, you can use the log method of the DTS object to write a custom log entry to all enabled log providers for your package. So it's a really nifty way of being able to gather information about the package as it executes. You can also raise custom events. Sometimes you'll want your code to inform the package that something has happened, but also want to allow the package to determine the response to take. In this example, if the administrator configured the package to log informational events at runtime, the message will be logged. If not, it won't. You can also define your own event handlers to respond to events that your script code raises. Another custom task is variable assignment. Although some built-in tasks, such as the execute SQL task, can directly store their output in variables, Integration Services doesn't include a task that allows you to assign arbitrary values to arbitrary variables. Some Integration Services developers like to include a script task at the beginning of their package's control flow that sets up starting values for package variables before the rest of the package runs. And you can use parameters for a similar sort of thing and configurations. You can also implement custom or proprietary business logic. This is a rather broad category, and the details depend on the individual needs of the package. You can either implement the logic in your script code or reuse logic within existing .NET assemblies. If your organization already has a set of standard assemblies that implement common business logic, you can reuse that code just as you would in a more traditional .NET client application.